What causes drug addiction? We think the answer is obvious. Drugs have strong chemicals that make our bodies dependent on them.
But journalist Johan Hari discovered that there is more to it. The messages in the video are based on his book Chasing the Screen, the first and the last days of war, drugs. In the 70s, a research experiment found that when a rat is put in an empty cage, all along with 2 water bottles, one normal and one drugged, it gets addicted to the drug water and eventually dies of malnutrition.
The experiment was seen as proof that drugs are uncontrollable, and it laid the foundation for 40 years of drug policy, with strict laws, rehab centers that focus on withdrawal, and massive war on drugs, making it clear that drugs are bad. What most people don't know is that in the same decade, another scientist, Professor Bruce Alexander, thought it was obvious that lonely rats in boring cages could choose drugs over water, so he put them in a rat park.
A large cage with friends and everything a rat could want, while still having free access to the drugs. Surprisingly, his friends chose not to use the drugs. The researchers even took the study one step further and had the rats use drugs for 57 days in a lonely cage until they became heavily addicted, and then placed them in the rat park. Astonishingly, the rats gradually reduced their drug use until they stopped using altogether and lived the rest of their lives drug-free. Experiments like this happen to humans all the time. Like, for example,
if you break your hip, you will be taken to a hospital and will be given loads of dimorphine for weeks or even for months.
Dimorphine is a heroin. It's in fact much stronger heroin that any addict can get on the street, because it's not contaminated by all the stuff drug dealers dilute it with.
There are people near you being given loads of deluxe heroin in hospitals right now.
So at least some of them should become addicts. I know, eh?
But this has been closely studied.
It doesn't happen.
your grandmother wasn't turned into a junkie by her hip replacement.
Why is that?
The theory of addiction comes in part from a series of experiments. Like in the Vietnamese War, 20% of American troops in Vietnam were using a lot of heroin.
People back home were really panicked because they thought there would be thousands of hundreds of junkies of the streets of the United States when the war was over.
But a study followed the soldiers home and found something striking. They didn't go to rehab. They didn't even go to withdrawal. 95% of them just stopped after they got home.
If you believe the old theory of addiction, that makes no sense. But if you believe Professor Alexander's theory, it makes perfect sense.
Because if you're put into a horrific jungle in a foreign country where you don't want to be and you could be forced to kill or die at any moment,
Doing heroin is a great way to spend your time.
but if you go back to your nice home with your friends and family, it's the equivalent of being taken out of the first cage and put into a human rat park.
Human beings have a strong desire to bond and to connect. When we are healthy and happy, we bond with people who are around us.
But when we can't because we are traumatized, isolated, and beaten down by life, we try to get attached, bonded to a temporary sense of relief.
It might be pornography or playing video games. It might be gambling all the time.
It might be cocaine, but we will bond with something because that is our human nature. The path out of unhealthy bonds is to create healthy bonds.
Addiction is just one symptom of the crisis of the disconnection, which is around us and we feel it.
The war on drugs we've been fighting for almost a century now has made everything worse. Instead of helping people, healing and putting their life together, we have cast them out from society.
We have made it harder for them to get a job and become more stable.
We take benefits and support from them if we catch them with drugs. They are put in prison cells, which are literal cages.
We put people who are not well in situations that make them feel worse and hate them for not recovering.
For too long, we have only talked about individual recovery from addiction. But we need now to talk about social recovery, because something wrong has happened with us as a group. We need to build a society that looks more like a rat trap, rather than those isolated cages.
We are going to have to change the natural way we live and rediscover each other.
The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is
Connection.